Welcome to the Zen of Reffing Roller Derby, Lesson 24, Expulsions and Fouling Out. I'm Axis Estival, the author of this training manual. I'm filming this on June 19th, 2018. The content of this presentation is up to date as of this recording. Should this video become outdated or replaced by a newer version, I'll put a link on the screen to where you can find more information. As always, you can find the latest version of the full training manual at www.tinyurl.com/zenreffing. Quick disclaimer. The WFTDA, MRDA, and JRDA are not responsible for the content of the training manual or this presentation, nor do they make any claims as to the accuracy of their content. Another note, if you spot any errors or outdated information in this presentation, please put a comment on YouTube explaining the issue and listing the timecode. Lesson 24, Expulsions and Fouling Out. A skater fouls out of a game after 7 penalties. A skater can accrue more than 7 penalties. They might have a whole series of ways and go out in a big blowout. But at 7, that's enough. The skater has fouled out. They're not instantly ejected from the game. However, when they're sent to the penalty box, and upon completing their time in the penalty box, they are not released. Instead, they're usually asked to stand either beside the box or behind the box, where they're not allowed to participate in the game for the remainder of the jam. Once the jam has ended, the box will typically hold the skater during the 30 seconds to make sure that there's no official review, for example, that would overturn one of the skater's penalties and such. Then, depending upon the venue setup, the skater is either fouled out, like they're basically given a little speech by the penalty box manager, or sometimes by an alt ref. Sometimes the head referee comes over and do it. But either they are fouled out at the end of that 30 seconds, and they can immediately exit the area. And if there's room, in the venue or the design of the venue such, they can go return, go sit in the audience, or go back to the locker room or staging area, then they can do so. Other venues, just the setup, they can't get out of the box, because doing so would take them back kind of in the track area. So they would wait at that point, just stay an extra jam, and then wait, and then they're, instructed basically to leave the track area. A fouled out skater is not allowed to return to the bench. We will allow that very briefly if they want to zoom past the bench and just grab their bottle of water, get the skate tool that they have, pick up, their inhaler, whatever they might, their personal belongings there. Then they must exit the bench area. They may, after that, they may not return to the bench area or the track area, including the safety lanes, for the remainder of the game. Now, as I said, any official can process a foul out. It's typically done by the box manager or head referee, but sometimes other officials will do it. Most notably, sometimes jammer referees, might process a foul out for a jammer, but typically these days it's more the box staff. An expulsion is different from a fouling out. Like a fouling out, as I said, that's cumulative over 7 penalties. An expulsion, this is used for an infraction that's so severe that it warrants removal of a skater from the game for a first offense. Now, typically these are physical infractions, for example, punching another skater in the face, and which you could argue this is just fighting. You could argue that it's like some sort of like forearm block, whatever. It doesn't have to be quite that egregious. It can also just be a skater, for example, has taken an intentional high block with their shoulder into another person's head. Could be a skater has intentionally taken a very egregious, very, very, very egregious hard back block, that has severely jeopardized somebody's skater. A lot of different things, and we're going to talk about the actual offenses that they can do in a minute. Now, something you need to keep in mind, they don't actually have to make physical contact with this, as in you can miss when you're engaging in an expulsion level block. So just because I take a swing at your face and I miss it, doesn't mean I didn't put you in danger, from that. So a skater can certainly be expelled even if there's no contact. Next, an expulsion level block need not have impact. If I go up to a skater in the middle of a jam and I just slap them across the face, and their head kind of like flips back, but they don't fall down, they don't go out of bounds or something like that. Or even if I shove the skater or something like that, or I try to shove them and their trajectory veers but they don't go out of bounds, these might warrant an expulsion over here. So, the block need not have impact. Like I said, sometimes they can miss, and that's still an expulsion. Sometimes they can hit, but it didn't really have maybe the effect that was intended, and that can also warrant the expulsion. Now, one thing to keep in mind is legal blocks never warrant an expulsion. We will often see in roller derby very hard hits, that, and sometimes they're creaming a player that is, they weren't in derby stance, they weren't looking around, they weren't keeping an eye out, and it's like Jaws the shark coming in on the swimmer, and they come in and it's a legal hit. It's upright, in play, in bounds, counterclockwise direction. They nailed that person in the shoulder. They sent them flying. It may even injure the skater, but it was a legal hit. Legal blocks never warrant an expulsion. I can't even really think of an exception, but we talked in the last lesson about like the intentionally falling like on the down skater, and you could make some sort of like argument that's legal. Although we have in our casebook a scenario that specifically says that particular action is forbidden. So you might be able to come up with a very extreme, unusual example of something that one could argue is technically legal, but is just clearly unsafe to do in any fashion. That certainly can exist. Skaters are very creative with the moves they come up with. So, when I say legal blocks never warrant an expulsion, I'm talking about legal blocks that are hard, but these are 99.99% of the legal blocks that take place in roller derby. If you're finding that 0.001% otherwise, and it's that really rare case, and it was just clearly not a safe action in any way, shape, or form, you'll know it, and you'll be able to discuss that and decide whether it warrants an expulsion. A reminder here, the head referee is the only person with authority to issue an expulsion. I don't care how much that person took a swing at the other's head. If you're not the head referee, you cannot issue them the gross misconduct. You can't do it. You don't have the authority to do that. You issue a penalty. You can certainly call them on misconduct and send them to the box, then make the recommendation to the head referee. Because some of these actions here, even though the rule set doesn't really outline a specific penalty for the action, it can be a fair compromise if we're not going to expel the skater. For example, forceful contact to an official that is either intentional or reasonably avoidable. You're in the middle of a jam, a skater's coming back from the box, and they cream and they take out another official. And you send them to the box, like that, because you believe this is an expulsion offense. There isn't really it's kind of like an all or nothing. There isn't really a penalty level of that offense. It's kind of expulsion or not. But if the determination is made not to expel them over there, saying, well, I believe the skater was a little bit careless, but it wasn't so much that I really want to expel the skater over this, like that, the penalty may be a fair compromise in there. Either way, if you believe the skater is presenting an imminent safety threat to someone else, just send them to the box. Worst that happens is the skater winds up spending 30 seconds in the box, and while that does impact the game, I would rather a skater spend 30 seconds in the box than somebody's safety be immediately jeopardized. Oh, and if, by the way, you do send someone to the box, for what you believe is an expulsion level action, after the jam, go in and recommend to the head referee that you'd like to discuss upgrading the action to an expulsion. So that should very definitely occur. Because if you don't, the head referee just gives a penalty and isn't going to deal with it. So both skaters and non-skaters can be expelled. This includes coaches, team support staff, etc. We don't typically use the word expel in conjunction with an official. You can certainly eject an official from the game. We don't generally call that expel because they're not on one team or the other. But absolutely, yeah, you can kick an official out if they're totally going beyond the pale as well. Just like if I had an EMT that stood up and started screaming obscenities in the middle of the game, and going totally ballistic, or took a swing at a skater, yeah, I'd throw out the EMT as well, although that might cause the game to grind to a halt. But yeah, we can throw people out, in that respect. Now, that's extreme if it's an official or somebody who's not not affiliated with one of the teams or the other. If it's like an audience member that's behaving egregiously, we're not. Don't think of this as an expulsion in the standard sense of things. Think of this as an ejection that needs to occur because somebody is becoming disruptive to the game. And every host league for any derby event should have a security plan. They should have somebody who's basically working as a bouncer, and the game can be halted. The bouncers can be summoned, and the person can be ejected from the venue. So don't hesitate to do that. But we don't really think of that as an expulsion. That's just. We've got a security plan, somebody has crossed the line, and they're being removed. Now, the ones that are associated with the team, which is the bulk of what we're talking about today here, captains or bench staff and skaters. When a bench staff member is expelled, the captains will serve a penalty for that bench staff person. It does not count as a penalty for the captain. They will have to serve the 30 seconds in the box, but it does not count towards that captain's 7. Similarly, if a skater is expelled from the game, it's 2 minutes into the game, the skater egregiously backblocks someone who expelled the skater from the game, the skater can't serve the penalty because we're booting them out. I mean, oftentimes these expulsions the jam has to be called because of the action that occurs. So we're not going to send them to sit in the box and participate in the next jam after we just expelled them. Instead, we're going to tally that penalty, that expulsion, as being crediting it to that skater who committed the action. But then we're going to bring a sub in to serve the actual penalty time for that skater. Substitutes cannot be brought in mid-jam. They can only be brought in between jams. And a substitute must serve in the position that the person was holding when they committed the egregious action, for which they're being expelled. If we're not certain what position they were, treat it as a blocker. If it occurs between jams, all skaters, are considered to be blockers between jams because we don't really have positions till the jam actually starts. So, mitigating factors can certainly be taken into account when deciding whether to expel someone. We talked in the last lesson about egregious penalty box injuries. The skater comes in, recklessly takes out a chair, hits an NSO, they get expelled. But when, upon further investigation, we discovered that actually they weren't being reckless. Yeah, they were coming a little fast, but they had a patch of water because somebody's water bottle spilled between jams and nobody had noticed. And that was a factor in that case, that they might have been able to control their action, except they hit a patch of water. And if you have ever hit a patch of water when you're on skates, it's like skating on ice. It's a nightmare. So in that case, we might downgrade. We might just consider it a penalty, instead of the expulsion there. Mitigating factors can be taken into account. Finally, expulsion should only be issued when there is no doubt that the issue warrants, or that the action warrants, an expulsion. The referee crew will often get together to discuss this. What did everybody see? All right, let's talk this over. What went on and such. Do not dismiss people's opinions out of hand. The head referee certainly should solicit opinions from outside the crew. For example, NSOs are a wonderful source of information, particularly experienced NSOs that are very savvy and familiar with the derby environment. You can also communicate with the announcers. They're watching the game. They're not maybe the first person you'd go to for an opinion, but they were watching like that. EMTs are watching the game. They can watch. Sometimes even the bench staff, or skaters. You can question them. You have to be a little careful now because now you're getting into territory where one side has a vested interest in seeing the result handled in a certain way. But in some cases, it can be entirely appropriate, to ask. And oftentimes, a bench staff member will say, absolutely, my skater was out of line, in what they did, and I want this skater gone. So, I mean, bench staff, while they do represent the interests of their team, they often, not always, but they often will not represent those interests at the expense of keeping a skater in the game who, in their opinion, has way crossed the line, and they don't want representing their team at that point. Like a skater who took a swing at an opponent, for example. So. Now, ejections, and ejections, by the way, is a somewhat antiquated term. It means both fouling out and expulsion. It's not a word you'll find in the rules. Some officials bristle at the use of the word ejection. I find it useful because I find it can just refer to both. But, like I said, ejected skaters typically held next to the penalty box until the jam ends. If the jam ends before the ejected skater's time in the penalty box is expired, another skater is then substituted for that skater between jams, and that skater serves any remaining time. If a captain or designated alternate is ejected, the team may designate a new one. Teams have a right to have a captain, and they have a right to have a designated alternate, so they can pick a new one. They don't have to pick a new one. A team does not, in this case, have to have a captain. The exception being, if a penalty must be served by a captain and there isn't one, then the team must designate a new one. If the team is unable or unwilling to do so, then the head referee can designate someone. And I have seen that occurred once in a game. My memory is that I was the head referee that did that, actually, where the team just got paralyzed. They just didn't know what to do. And they all looked at each other. They didn't have a backup plan, and nobody spoke up. And finally, after about 10 seconds of them not sure what to do, I pointed at a skater. I said, "Congratulations, you're the new captain. You will be serving 30 seconds in the box on this." I just picked a skater at random. I didn't know the skaters on the team. But that's very rare. Generally speaking, the team knows its pecking order. That was a very, very new team, and I don't think they had prepped for that situation. But generally speaking, a team that will instantly be able to designate a new captain, or at least within a few moments do so. Now, we haven't talked about what a skater has to do once they are ejected from the game. And this is once they've been processed for their foul out or expulsion, they've grabbed their stuff in the bench area, and what? Well, the skater is allowed to go sit in the audience. Now, they don't have to. They can leave the track area. They can go return to the locker room or staging area or such. In some venues, there is no locker room. The locker room is actually just a corner of the rink itself, in which case, fine. That is the staging area. That's where they may return. In this particular case, wherever they go, the skater must behave in a manner appropriate for a member of an audience, basically somebody who's at the game. They may not interrupt play. They may not return to the track area. They may not go to the bench area. They may not set foot in the outside safety lane. They may not run under the track between jams and talk to their skaters. No, that's not what we allow an audience to do. What they can do is clap, cheer, yell, "Call off the jam," and such. They can act like we would allow a member of the audience to act. If they're getting beyond that, if they're starting to push it a little bit, they're going and they're standing right on the border of that safety lane between jams and starting to talk to, their skaters and trying to give advice, then we can issue a warning. You be very careful. You are beginning, you have reached the point where you're about to interfere with gameplay, and we're watching you. Generally speaking, skaters don't push that, but sometimes they do. They can't resist, and they come running onto the track between jams, talk to their team. And at that point, an ejected skater loses their privilege of being in the audience. They are now considered to have committed an interference penalty. Interference is an antiquated verbal cue in this case. Some people would say it's an interference penalty. Interference, is an actual verbal cue now, meaning kind of something else. So if you want to call it illegal procedure, interference, it doesn't really matter. Point being is they've committed an infraction at this point. So they're banished back to the locker room or staging area, or can leave the venue. That's certainly acceptable. And the captain will take a unsporting conduct penalty for that. And like I said, any audience member that needs to be ejected should be handled in accordance with the host's security plan. And sometimes a skater is irate, is upset, it is very angry. And in that case, it is entirely appropriate to have the alt referee, and some tournaments, by the way, will do this by default. The alt referee is in charge of escorting the skater back to the staging area. Tournaments may set some of their own policies, but generally they don't have to. They can keep their gear on, they can go sit in the audience and such, but some tournaments set some other policies beyond that. They're starting to run into, they have to be a little careful. WIFTA has an actual expulsion policy, so certain tournaments with sanctioned games need to follow the tournament policy. If it's regulation games, this is nothing that a referee trainee needs to know, or a new referee. Your tournament will run you through on what policies they want followed. But generally speaking, it's a very good idea if a skater is upset to have an alternate ref just escort them back. Let's just make sure that they're not immediately turning and headed right back, over to the opposing bench area to take a swing at a skater or something like that. So, a list of expellable offenses. This is not an exhaustive list. I don't think there could be an exhaustive list. We're going to tell some stories in a little bit about some offenses, and it's going to get very creative. But let's talk about things that the rules really outline, or at least I've noticed in my experience. Things to do to an opponent. Negligent or reckless blocking to an illegal target zone of an opponent. Negligent or reckless blocking with an illegal blocking zone. Again, crazy back block would be the target zone. Crazy form, like you just shove a skater as they skate past you. that's, your blocking zone. You can't use your forearms like that. Negligent or reckless illegal contact, that is out of bounds, out of play, via airborne, down, etc. like that. Intentional, negligent, or reckless contact above the shoulder. Intentionally tripping an opponent. Skater goes past you, you just put out your foot and knock him over. Like that. I mean, technically speaking, you could argue that's a target zone block, but I'd make a mention of that because intentionally tripping opponent is an easy something to do. They rarely will do it discreetly. More often, you're going to see it in terms of somebody gets angry and they take a kick at another skater, like that. Intentionally falling on a prone or downed opponent. Slide tackling an opponent. Holding or pinning a skater to the ground. Like you will see this sometimes, like, oh, I push you out of bounds and you're angry, so you grab me, and as you're falling, you drag me to the ground with you. That would count, like holding or pinning a skater to the ground, like this. Keep in mind, use a little discretion here. If there's a fight between two teams, two skaters are getting into a fight, and somebody runs up and they grab their teammate and they're pulling them out of the fight, and in the process they have to hold that teammate and pull them back to separate them, that's not what we're trying to talk about here. Like that is a person that is a team that is specifically trying to, lower down the level of conflict, that's going on. So that's not the same thing as, like in the middle of a jam, falling on a skater and then just grabbing them and not letting them up, for example. Shoving an opponent, intentionally removing an opponent's helmet cover, all of these things. Expellable offenses directed towards an official would include forceful contact that is either intentional or reasonably avoidable. Would include deliberate and excessive insubordination to an official, usually abusive, profane, obscene words, gestures, etc. like that. And just, you give somebody a quick finger, you're going to get a penalty for that. You sit there and go like this, and you're just standing in place. Woo! Take it, suck me, ref. Now that is excessive. That is deliberate and excessive, and now they've earned the expulsion on it. Willfully failing to leave the floor after fouling out. Now, again, a skater who's fouled out, we process them, they're expected to go. They can sit in the audience, but they're expected to go. But if we have a skater who is, no, I don't have to leave. I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. Like that. And they want to stand in place and disrupt the game and prevent it from continuing like that. Now we can upgrade the fouling out to an expulsion. And now in doing so, that is another 30 seconds that needs to be served by, and not going to be by them, it's going to be by a replacement or a substitute for them, like that. But again, we have, now their foul out has been upgraded. Let's see, we've got, to anyone, contact with the head of a skater not wearing a helmet. And really, this doesn't even have to be a skater. This could be contact with the head of anyone not wearing a helmet. And again, use a little context here like that. Skater comes up to an official between jams and says, pardon me, you got a feather in your hair, and they pull something out. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like a skater falls, their helmet pops off, and you'll see this on rare occasion in the game. And they stand back up, they're putting their helmet on, and a skater comes in and gives them a block that turns into a high block, but their helmet's not on. Boom, immediate out. You'll notice, by the way, if a skater's helmet comes off, skaters will generally give them a very wide berth. They will not interact with them, because they want them to get their gear back on. But yeah, if they're engaging and they touch their head, and again, this doesn't even have to be very forceful contact, but they do something to get in there, and they're intentionally doing this or negligently doing this, yes, that's expulsion. Pulling of the head, neck, or helmet. You would not want to be skating, have someone grab your helmet and yank you to the side. That would hurt like hell and quite possibly do spinal injury. We're certainly not going to tolerate that in Derby. Any behavior that puts someone, including the offender, at serious risk of harm. This is written very generically so as to give a official a lot of discretion in how they want to enforce this. Again, don't go hog wild at this. You have a responsibility to make sure these are only egregious offenses. But, for example, skater is, a jammer's coming up to a wall of opposing blockers, and he goes, watch me. They stop, and they promptly do a cartwheel through the wall of blockers. The blockers stand aside to let the person go through. But as part of a cartwheel, their skates are way up in the air, and so now you got skates going like a foot or 2 feet away from opponents' heads, like that. I'm not even talking about the gain of position, about getting past them. Maybe you can consider it down because their hands were touching the floor, so it was just this. But bottom line is that cartwheel, not cool. Nobody wants to get skates flying near their head. So that would be an example of this. Fighting, obviously, we're not. Anybody who's actively taking swings, actively participating in the fight, jumping, grabbing, things like that, we're going to expel them for it. Protecting oneself without engaging the other person is legal. So if you're just sitting there like this, or just trying to kind of keep someone away from you or something like that, that's legal. You're allowed to defend yourself. You're not allowed to defend yourself by hitting back. That is not legal. Completely losing one's temper and or yelling a string of abuse or profanity. Doesn't matter who they're yelling at. They have just lost their shit and they are now just screaming mad. They're basically throwing essentially like a tantrum. They're out. That doesn't have a place in Derby. Threatening physical violence. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill that jammer. I'm going to kill that ref. You're going to find me out in the parking lot with a crowbar after the game. Anything. Other things. Interference in gameplay by skaters or support staff that are not in a jam. Again, skaters, you can't just run out and join in a jam if you're not in it. Forceful contact to a non-teammate while entering the penalty box. We've talked about that. I could really add a correctly placed non-teammate, but again, some of this is open to some discretion. If you go in there and you're initiating a block on the opposing coach because they happen to be standing in the box, no, you're going to get expelled for that. So, like that. Forcible contact with the penalty box seat to a non-teammate while entering the penalty box. I say non-teammate because, again, in a couple of rules editions ago where this was far more defined than it is now, that there were certain exemptions for teammates and such. This situation is open to more interpretation now than it used to be. So, generally speaking, skaters need to just watch themselves coming into the box. Arrive in a calm and controlled fashion. Don't hit anybody, there's not going to be problems. As soon as there is forcible contact, either directly or by hitting a seat who hits somebody, now we have significant problems. Something to keep in mind, if the seat itself has experienced a structural failure, you sit down in the seat and the seat breaks, and falls down, that would be a different story over there. We're not looking to eject people because the seat broke on them. Finally, I want to just mention something here, I want to mention suspensions. This is not a common thing in Derby. Suspensions only happen during certain tournament play and during sanctioned play, to my knowledge. if there's more things out there that do this, then I'm not aware of them. But generally speaking, when a skater's expelled, there's a question on the form about, do you recommend this be upgraded to a suspension? And we're getting into different policies. The JRDA deals with this differently than the WFTDA, who deals with it differently than MRDA. But, it can result in sending paperwork and letting a certain review panel look at it, or if it's in a tournament, it can result in certain meetings of the senior officials at the tournament, as well as the representatives of both teams and the accuser, and etc. Yeah. Suffice to say, what a suspension means is that the egregious action was so egregious that not only is the skater banned from the rest of that game, they are now potentially going to be banned for multiple games. In extreme cases, and I'm talking really extreme, skaters have been banned for 6 months, for a year, or could be even theoretically removed from the sport. But they're just simply not allowed to participate any longer. So those are very rare. Those are usually infamously, there was a brawl at the end of the MRDA Champs one year that resulted in several very large suspensions. But most suspensions are not nearly as controversial in nature, but they do require review. They do have an appeals process, and you would generally only want to do something, like I said, recommend a suspension, if you believe the action is so egregious that skater either punitively needs to be punished for additional games out, or that by participating in additional games, they may be threatening the health or the welfare or the safety of other people in there. And we're in a few moments, we're going to be talking about a number of expulsion stories that people have told me, and some of those you will quickly realize are going to be suspension worthy, and many of them are not. So Now, I want to stop for a moment here because I have played in a couple of prior video clips. I've played in some of the other lessons. I've played a couple of expulsion actions, so I just want to repeat them right now. I just want you to just take a look and get an idea on what an expulsion level action would be. None of these would be suspension worthy, but they're worth looking at. All right, I have 2 bits of footage to show you again here. First one. This was a high block expulsion. Oh, loud in my ear. That's killing me. Okay. Turn that down so I don't blast out my ear. All right, here we go. Boom. Again, watch this. Right to the face. You do not want to be that blocker. You see how she's getting it? Yeah. Skater, what we're looking for here, again, just a regular high block. Sometimes that goes up there, isn't egregious. But the skater is, she's stopped in place, she's dug her toe stops in to increase the force, and she looks like she's probably raising that arm right up. I mean, certainly she's getting in there. She's going up there. Something has hit her right in the throat. So, yeah, I would not want to be that blocker in this. And that would warrant an expulsion. The only reason I wouldn't expel for that is, like, now, first off, on this, as a head referee, I would definitely want to confer with the crew, and I'd want to get the views of what everybody else saw, because I do have, some skaters in the way, got a referee that kind of went by in the aftermath. I would want some corroborating opinion, but this would certainly be something that would be worth a discussion on having there, and it wouldn't surprise me if the other referees, supported that. Loud in my ear here again. I don't know if you can hear this at home, but bottom line, again, digging in with the heels, boom, clockwise right up into her. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have it in slow motion, so. But you can see her. She's stopped. She's got those toe stops down. And boom, sends her flying over there. She even took a step in the clockwise direction over there. Again, this is egregious. Just because something's a hard block doesn't necessarily mean it's illegal. You can have illegal I'm sorry. Just because it's a hard block and illegal doesn't mean it's expulsion worthy. But in this case, it certainly was. Now, one thing to keep in mind: both of these actions resulted in a down skater, and like an injury, basically. So, don't necessarily think that all injuries need to result in expulsion. It is possible to overcall expulsions. So, don't jump to conclusions. It's worth talking to your officials. I didn't in this particular clip. I did not. I immediately went and issued it. But in retrospect, I probably should have talked to my crew. I was confident on it. I don't think anybody on the crew would have contradicted me and said they didn't think it warranted it. But sometimes that happens. There have been cases when 6 of the 7 referees on a crew say absolutely not. No, this was the other person initiating or whatever. Does not warrant expulsion. And it may be worth talking the head referee down in that case, because the head referee otherwise believes it does. So you want to arrive at a consensus if possible. And if you're not talking to your entire crew, you're not arriving at a consensus. You're making a decision on your own. Now some stories for you here, if for no other reason than I like to talk. But I guarantee you, you're gonna find some of these stories very interesting. I asked on Facebook, on the iDerby forum, which is like 7,000 or something like that members, what interesting expulsion level actions people have witnessed. Now, some of the responses turned out to be more to be about foul outs or even occasionally penalties, but they're really great stories. So let me read you some of these here. Chest-to-chest blocking, where a forearm that was held out in front of the initiator slipped from their chest to right under the opponent's chin and then hit them in the neck and head with force. We got a skater who bit another skater. So, yes, biting, and actually they're used to 5.16.14 or something like that, I think, in a prior rule set, was actually listed as an expulsion offense. So, no, you can't bite other skaters, even if it doesn't draw blood. Skater was brawling. I think they're using this more euphemistically than literally, but brawling with an opponent while trying to hide it as blocking. After the referees expelled the skater, she attempted to punch the referee. There's a couple of lessons in here. First, this is our first example of a suspension level action. When you're being expelled from the game, you are not expected to immediately take a swing at a referee. That would warrant, certainly would warrant recommendation for discussion about a suspension there. There's also a lesson here. A referee doesn't necessarily have to inform the skater they're being expelled. They can call in the team captains, give them the verdict on the expulsion, and then ask the team captain if they would like to break the news to the skater. Oftentimes that's a really good idea because their team captain has far more rapport with their skater, at least hopefully does, than the referee, and is useful when dealing with an extremely upright skater who might react erratically or react badly from it. So the coach can go over there, calm the skater down for a moment. If we got to take a minute time out to let him kind of deal with this, I'd rather take the delay, like have the game delayed by the extra minute while the coach calms the skater down a little bit, rather than have that skater take a swing at a referee and potentially injure the referee. So there have been games in other sports where referees have gotten punched in the face, fallen down, and been severely injured or even died. So I'm okay with that minute off if it means keeping a skater from taking a swing at someone. A late hit, resulting in two skaters getting into a name-calling and shoving match. Both skaters were then expelled. A skater who felt she was intentionally low-blocked tackled the opposing skater. A teammate of the opponent's team then jumped into the fray and attacked the initial skater, the one who thought she was low-blocked. Both skaters, there were expelled. So for that, you can't tackle and you can't jump in and wade into the dog pile fighting to help one of your teammates. You can't do that. Two opposing skaters had a long-standing grudge against each other. Skater 1 egregiously high-blocked Skater 2 and was sent to the penalty box. And as the referee who told the story said, it was very clear there was going to be an expulsion between jams. However, Skater 2 gets back up, skates across the infield, skates across the track, and initiates a block into Skater 1, knocking them into the audience. The jam then ended. Both expelled skaters were yelling at each other, nearly got into a fight in the penalty box while the referees were trying to sort through all this. During their removal from the game, Skater 2 threw their helmet at Skater 1. It missed Skater 1, but hit an EMT. Security was then in to escort the blockers back to their changing rooms and keep them away from each other. Oh, and the person said the benches charged at each other during all of this, and a brawl nearly erupted. So, yeah, this is a nightmare of epic proportions. This is your worst case scenario, and yes, there's some serious suspension recommendations in here somewhere. That Skater 2, the one who threw the helmet at Skater 1 and hit the EMT, I don't think they're going to be coming back for a while. I don't think their team wants them back for each other, But yeah, this is not allowed. Now I want to tell a little side note here, a little side story. First off, if you've got two skaters that are fighting with each other and you need to process their expulsion, you do not have to immediately send them both to the box. That's not necessarily a good idea to let them get into it in the penalty box while the referees are conversing. It is entirely appropriate briefly because you've stopped play, so play has stopped at this point. You can send one skater to the box and the other one you can order them to either stand right here, return to your bench until we can deal with you. You can keep them away from each other for a little bit. That can work. Sending them to their own box, not necessarily the ideal thing. You can also, if you've got an NSO there, a HNSO, head NSO would be a good person. You could be like, just instruct them, get this person, take them away. I want them away from the box, away from their bench area. I want you to just hold them away from everybody for a minute, and they'll either do it themselves or they'll assign someone. You can, I don't want to have somebody babysit an irate skater because I don't know how that person is going to behave. But at the same time, not letting them go back and wind up their team on the bench or get into the box and into a fight. This can be an okay. Just you stay there. Now a story. One game I know where there was skaters got into arguing it after a game. After a jam. They didn't start swinging each other, so there's no expulsion here, but the benches are coming out, and everybody is just yelling at each other, and everybody's walking towards each other, and the head referee was very worried there was about to be a brawl. The head referee stepped right in between both sides, blew her whistle as loud as she could, and announced to both teams that any skater who wasn't back in their bench area in 10 seconds would be ejected from the game. This is a little extreme. She was bluffing because we don't actually have the authority to do that. But skaters didn't know that, and their coach quickly corralled both sets of players back to their bench area. Let's see. Yes, ejections can be officials. So again, this isn't formally ejection. This is more like firing one of your staff. But here's a story about that happened. An IPR made a call. The head referee overturned it. The IPR remade the call. The head referee overturned it again. The jam referee ends. The IPR gets into an argument with the head referee. The head referee then ejects the IPR and calls for security to escort the IPR from the area. The IPR then tried to take a swing at the head referee. They pulled their arm back, but before they were able to launch the punch, security grabbed the person and pulled them back away from the head referee. So, yeah, these things can spoil over. Officials certainly can lose their cool as well. I'm not going to even discuss the virtue of overturning calls and remaking the call and things like this. Generally speaking, the head referee, they're the ultimate authority of the game. If the head referee chooses to overturn a call, you don't remake it. But that aside, yeah, that IPR didn't handle that terribly well. I don't know that the head referee handled it well. Maybe they could have de-escalated it somehow or something. But either way, that IPR was gone. A skater deliberately kicks an opponent, skates from underneath them, then pulls her hair as she's falling down. As the initial skater skates to the box, she takes her helmet off, and she's just swinging it around and around. Person said as if it was some sort of grisly war trophy and she was a barbarian or something. So, yeah. Skater 1 throws their helmet cover in the face of Skater 2, who's an opponent. Skater 2 then kicks Skater 1. Words were exchanged between the skaters. Skater 1 is sent to the box, where she proceeds to make a suck-it crotch motion to the referees. Both skaters were expelled. The coach of Skater 1's team then comes out and throws a hissy fit and was expelled for that, and he slams the hockey door on his way out of the venue. So, again, no one at their finest here. Two skaters from the same team get into a fist fight at a non-regulation tournament. The head referee of this particular game was also the tournament head referee, expelled them both from the game and the tournament, and instructed security to escort them from the building. So, thank you for attending. Your services will not be necessary anymore to play in any further games. So we're going to have security escort you from the building, and thanks for nothing. That's probably not the way exactly we want to put it, but that was as the story is relayed to me about how the person was putting it. Same tournament, skater became upset. She picked up a chair and she smashed it down on the floor. The head referee immediately made a beeline to the skater to expel her, basically because she's lost her. She's throwing a temper at this point. The coach immediately intercepted the head referee and said, "I'm already on it. And while the head referee watched over there, the coach informed the skater she's out for the remainder of the tournament and was to leave the venue immediately. In a regulation or a sanction tournament, yes, we would still go through the formal expulsion and do that. This was a non-regulation tournament, so they were being a little bit more casual about it. But yeah, the coach didn't want that skater participating either. So, skater fouls out of the game for the 8th game in a row. Skater becomes upset and has to be carried off the track, kicking and screaming. I do not know who carried the skater off the track. I certainly would not want to do so. Maybe it was their team, maybe security, maybe the police. I don't know, but not a good one there. So yeah. That one, by the way, would you recommend that for suspension? Oh, I'd say if they are actually being physically dragged off the track, kicking and screaming, then yes, that warrants both the upgrade to the expulsion and and a recommendation for expulsion. It's one thing if they want to stand there and argue and they have to be politely escorted by security out. It's another one if they have to be dragged off the track. Coach becomes upset at the reffing at a tournament, has words with the head referee, and then tries to assault the head referee. Skater on the team has to restrain their own coach and drag him away from the track area. The coach was then expelled. Skater falls to the floor and intentionally kicks out at a standing skater. A skater's glasses fall off her face during gameplay. She picks them up and throws them, to the outside safety lane where they hit a referee. Again, you cannot throw objects in a game of derby and hit people with them. I think this is also where context can come in. If the glasses went and kind of bounces off a referee's knee pad, I don't know that I would have expelled for this. Certainly no one wants to get hit by glasses, but if it's just sort of like a little bit careless or something, I might have issued just an additional penalty for it. No, if it gets up there and almost hits about hits the referee in the face or hits him in the chest and something like that, yes, I'm going to expel at that point. Like that. You would not want to get hit by a pair of glasses in the face. You wouldn't want to get hit by anything in the face. An out-of-bounds skater taking a hip whip off a referee in the inside safety lane. You may not take hip whips. Skaters may not take hip whips off referees. A skater gets upset on the track, starts swearing at her teammates. The opposing team asks her to calm down, so she begins swearing at them as well. Head referee then expels her after the jam, at which point she yells that she's only being expelled because her team was winning. Okay. Skater is injured in the outside safety lane, tells the OPR they can't breathe. OPR immediately calls the jam, signals for the medics. The skater's coach doesn't like this. Skater's coach repeatedly starts swearing at the referee for interrupting a jam in progress, arguing that it didn't need to be called because the skater wasn't on the track. Head referee tells the coach repeatedly to calm down. The coach does not, continues swearing, and was expelled. Jammer is blocked by their own skater. Jammer responds by punching their teammate in the back of the head. Now, skater sprints out of the engagement zone. At 30 feet ahead of the engagement zone, they leap onto the back of the jammer and make initial contact with their elbow. As somebody said, this was simultaneous, egregious leaping contact, forearm contact, back block, and out-of-play blocking. The team coach looked very sheepish and did not contest the expulsion. Penalized skaters traveling to the penalty box. The OPR is hugging the inside track line. The skater is yelling for the OPR to move. The OPR gestures, go behind me. The skater yells, move. The OPR repeats the gesture. Skater then initiates a block to the OPR, but it's a poorly done block, and all that results is the skater falls on her ass while the OPR continues onward. In this particular case, by the way, this is absolutely an expulsion level action. The referee crew, however, decided only to issue a penalty because of the lack of impact on the referee. No. As we said before, you can block, you can egregiously block and miss, or block with no impact. There was no reason not to throw the skater out for this. They should have been gone. Shortly after a game began, a blocker skates clockwise, knocks down an opponent, and receives a penalty. Argues the call on the track, and issued insubordination penalty. Same skater later cuts the track, and again starts arguing the call, and receives another insub. Same skater lines up between the jammer line for another jam. They're lining up. They're lining up behind the jammer line next to their jammer, and they receive an illegal position penalty. And once again start arguing. This time shouting, "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about." So that was their third insub for the game, 6th penalty overall. And by the way, a lot of referees at this point would be saying, "Okay, you have now been insubordinate, by arguing and such 3 times in a game. That's sufficient to expel you." This crew is apparently a little more leeway because they just sent that skater to the box. After being released from the box, the skater then skates up to one of the referees and says, "You're a bullshit fucking ref. Open your fucking eyes." The referee then issues a 4th insubordination penalty, which fouls out the skater. And by the way, we're only 9 minutes into the game at this point. I can't help this is not funny, but it's funny at the same time. 9 minutes into the game, the skater has already gotten themselves thrown out of the game. That takes a lot of work. Now the punchline. That's not even the punchline, by the way. Now the bench coach comes running in and starts behaving in a threatening manner to one of the referees, so the head referee expels the bench coach. The skater then, who fouled out of the game, then leaves the track area screaming at everyone. Skater is stuck behind a chest block from an opponent, so the skater reaches out, takes her opponent by the face, and shoves her to the side so she can get through. Skater is expelled for it and laughs about the whole thing as she's exiting the game. Jam timer is standing on the pivot line, signaling an official timeout. Coach is holding his hand and holding his hat in his hand and talking to the team just in front of the pivot line. Head referee makes an end of timeout gesture to the jam timer, and coach whirls around to rush off the track and accidentally hits the jam timer into the face with their cap. Jammer timer, by the way, said that stung, so it did hurt a little bit, and the coach was then expelled for that. I could see some crews not issuing the expulsion. I think the expulsion is fair in this case. It kind of sucks. I'm sure the coach was deeply apologetic. It was not intentional. but it was negligent. Just, an accident. It happens, but something that shouldn't have occurred. And, keep in mind that NSO took a hat in the face that stung. 2 inches, 2 inches change, and they might have gotten hit in the eye with it. And suddenly it's not funny anymore. THO, that's a tournament head official, ejected a non-skating official mid-tournament and ordered the person out of the venue. THO said the NSO had intentionally distorted facts about an action to maliciously have a skater that they didn't like expelled from the game. So, yeah, not an ejection in the standard sense, more of a firing, but yes, had security escort that person out of the venue and said they could return to the venue, but only if they bought a ticket and sat in the audience and behaved like an audience member. Skater exited the penalty box at turn 4, sprints the length of the straightaway, initiates a shoulder block directly into the spine of an opponent while traveling at high speed at turn 1. As the skater was being removed from the alt-ref, the skater is waving to the audience and encouraging them to cheer, and this was a juniors game. The coach was expelled for yelling at referees more loudly than the announcer's voice over the PA system. During a co-ed game, a skater falls on her back. She then begins repeatedly kicking the groin of a male opponent standing over her. Skater sucker punches an opponent, but was not expelled because the referees did not see it. There's a lesson here, as I said before, when appropriate, and this certainly sounds like an appropriate case. Referees can and should solicit input from others. This can include NSOs, can also include announcers, EMTs, bench staff, etc. I'm sure the bench staff on the team that got sucker punched, they certainly were pointing this out. But in that case, ask the other bench staff, did you see this? Tell me truthfully, what happened? And they might tell a more favorable version of their story, but they might also acknowledge, yep, my skater lost her shit and punched the other skater, like that. That's enough corroboration to expel there if the other, if the bench staff member is willing to concede that. So, skaters released from the box, but mistakenly believed they had fouled out. Said skater then skates to the middle of the track, drops their pants, flips off the ref crew, and skates away to the locker room. Not so cool. Blocker commits their 7th penalty. On their way to the box, they remove their mouth guard, tell a ref to go fuck himself, thus getting both their 8th and 9th penalties on the way. I've heard a similar story, by the way, with a skater that was a brilliant block, but it was out of play, so they take an out-of-play block penalty for it. As they leave the track, they take off their helmet. They start screaming at the referee, screaming obscenities at the referee as they're skating off. When they get to the box, there's a skater exiting from the box. They make light contact with each other, but, no impact. This is very light contact. But this skater then turns and punches the other skater in the face. So, basically, they had 7 penalties. We're going to foul out, and they got penalties 8, 9, and 10, 10 of which was an expulsion on the way. So, if you're ever wondering why the penalty tracking sheet has so many columns, this is the sort of reason why. And last example, Skater 1 initiates a hard block to an opposing Skater 2. Skater 2's girlfriend is also playing in that game and does not like that one little bit. So Skater 2, even though the girlfriend is on the bench, she exits the bench area in the middle of the jam, skates to Skater number 1, and tackles her. Yeah, that's an expulsion on Skater number 2. So I want to give some final comments here. Some of these are funny. You can't help but to, be amused by some of these, or whoa, it's a bit of a train wreck. We can't look away. The purpose of giving these examples is not to make skaters and coaches seem like animals in a game. Expulsions in Derby are uncommon. I have seen them maybe 1 out of every 10 games that I've officiated. They should never be officialed lightly. I could have compiled a similar list of expulsions in which referees overstepped their authority and were improperly expelling skaters. So, expulsion should only occur when there's 100% certainty that an egregious action has taken place. That continued participation by that skater would undermine both the integrity of the game or the safety of its participants. Every sport has its share of reckless and negligent actions. It happens. They get expelled. But it also has its share of John McEnroes, who, if you're familiar with him, used to throw shit fits when things didn't go his way. But these are still in a small percentage of games that take place. You know, fouling out, that's a lot more common, but even that doesn't happen every game. Either way, most people in Derby, they want a safe or fun game. Do your part as an official to keep it that way. Keep control over the game. Keep calm. Avoid escalating situations. If the skaters are starting to get upset and be angry, call an official timeout. Bring the coaches in. Talk to them. It just gives the skaters on the bench a minute to just kind of interrupt. Talk to the coaches. Say, I'm just going to keep you here for a minute because I want these skaters to calm down. We're getting chippy. I'm worried skaters are going to get injured. I don't want this to happen. Keep everybody calm. Keep your officials calm. Keep the skaters calm. Keep the audience calm. Keep control of the game, and then you will find that most games work out just fine. That concludes this lesson. I will see you back in lesson 25 to discuss no pack situations. Thanks.